Welcome back to the Mind Shelf, where we dive deep into the psychology of human potential and unlock the wisdom that transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary journeys. Today we're confronting one of the most powerful forces that shapes our destiny: fear. Not the kind of fear that keeps you safe from real danger, but the insidious whispered fears that convince you to play small, dream smaller, and live a life far beneath your true potential. If you've ever felt like you're living someone else's version of your life, or if you've caught yourself saying, "someday" more often than today, then this exploration is for you. Let's uncover how fear becomes the architect of a life too small, and more importantly, how you can reclaim the blueprint of your dreams. The invisible prison. Understanding how fear constructs limitations. Fear is perhaps the most sophisticated prison ever constructed because it requires no physical bars, no guards, and no keys. Yet it confines millions to lives far smaller than their potential. Unlike external obstacles that we can see and strategize against, fear operates from within, masquerading as wisdom, prudence, and realism, while systematically eroding our capacity for growth, adventure, and authentic self-expression. The paradox of fear-based living is that in our attempt to avoid pain, rejection, or failure, we guarantee ourselves a different kind of suffering: the slow, persistent ache of unfulfilled potential. We trade the sharp, temporary pain of taking risks for the dull, chronic pain of regret. We choose the familiar discomfort of limitation over the unknown possibilities that lie beyond our comfort zones. Fear doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It whispers reasonable-sounding excuses. You're not ready yet. You don't have enough experience. What if people think you're foolish? These internal narratives become so familiar that we mistake them for our own authentic thoughts, never questioning whether they're serving our highest good or simply keeping us trapped in a life of diminished dreams. The anatomy of a fear-driven life. A life governed by fear has distinct characteristics that, while appearing safe and sensible on the surface, gradually compress our world into an increasingly smaller sphere of experience. Understanding these patterns is the first step toward recognizing when fear is making decisions for us rather than allowing us to make conscious choices about our lives. The shrinking circle of possibility. When fear drives our decisions, our world naturally contracts. We begin to eliminate possibilities not based on genuine lack of interest or conflicting values, but based on the discomfort associated with uncertainty. Career opportunities are declined because they feel too risky. Relationships are avoided because vulnerability feels too dangerous. Creative pursuits are abandoned because the possibility of criticism seems unbearable. This shrinking happens so gradually that we often don't notice it until we look back and wonder how our once expansive dreams became so modest, how our bold aspirations transformed into careful compromises. The 22-year-old who dreamed of traveling the world becomes the 45-year-old who has never left their home state. The aspiring artist becomes the person who used to paint, but gave it up for something more practical. The comfort zone trap. The comfort zone, while psychologically necessary for rest and recovery, becomes a prison when fear convinces us that it's the only safe place to live. What begins as a temporary refuge becomes a permanent residence, and what was once a launching pad for new adventures becomes a protective bunker. Fear transforms the comfort zone from a resource into a restriction by constantly expanding the list of things that feel too dangerous to attempt. Public speaking feels too risky, so we avoid opportunities that require presentation skills. Starting a business seems too uncertain, so we remain in jobs that drain our souls but provide predictable paychecks. Moving to a new city appears too overwhelming, so we stay in places that no longer inspire us. The insidious nature of comfort zone imprisonment is that it often feels reasonable and responsible. Society reinforces this by celebrating stability and warning against recklessness, making it easy to rationalize our fear-based choices as mature decision-making. The perfectionism paralysis. Fear often masquerades as high standards, but perfectionism is frequently just fear wearing a socially acceptable mask. When we demand perfection from ourselves before taking action, we create an impossible barrier to entry that guarantees inaction. The manuscript that's never submitted because it's not quite ready. The business that's never launched because the plan isn't perfect. The relationship that's never pursued because we don't feel worthy yet. Perfectionism driven by fear creates a catch-22. We can't gain the experience and confidence we need without taking action. But fear tells us we can't take action without first having the experience and confidence. This circular trap keeps us perpetually preparing for a life we never actually live. The psychological roots, where fear-based living begins. Understanding how fear becomes the dominant force in our decision-making requires examining both evolutionary psychology and individual conditioning. Our brains are naturally wired to prioritize survival over growth, safety over expansion, and familiarity over exploration. This biological inheritance served our ancestors well when physical threats were immediate and constant. But in modern life, these same mechanisms often work against our psychological and spiritual development. The survival brain in a modern world. The human brain's threat detection system, centered in the amygdala, evolved to keep us alive in environments where the stakes were literally life and death. This system is binary. It recognizes threat or safety with no middle ground for nuanced risk assessment. In prehistoric times, this served us well. The rustle in the bushes could be wind or a predator, and it was better to assume predator and live than assume wind and die. In contemporary life, however, this same system treats social rejection, career uncertainty, and creative vulnerability as existential threats. The brain responds to the possibility of embarrassment in a business meeting with the same neurochemical cascade it would use to respond to a charging lion. This evolutionary mismatch means we're constantly in a state of hypervigilance about threats that, while psychologically uncomfortable, are not actually dangerous to our survival. Childhood conditioning and fear formation. Many of our deepest fears about living fully are formed in childhood through well-meaning but misguided messages from parents, teachers, and society. Children who are repeatedly told to be careful, don't take risks, or play it safe, learn that the world is fundamentally dangerous and that their natural impulses toward exploration and experimentation cannot be trusted. Educational systems often reinforce fear-based thinking by punishing mistakes rather than celebrating learning, creating generation after generation of adults who are terrified of being wrong. The child who raises their hand and gives an incorrect answer only to be met with embarrassment or criticism learns that it's safer to remain silent than risk being exposed as imperfect. Family systems also play a crucial role in shaping our relationship with risk and possibility. Children from families where failure is met with shame, disappointment, or withdrawal of love learn to associate taking risks with losing connection. They develop survival strategies that prioritize approval and acceptance over authentic self-expression, carrying these patterns into adulthood where they limit career choices, relationship decisions, and creative pursuits based on what others might think rather than what aligns with their true desires. Cultural and social reinforcement. Society reinforces fear-based living through subtle and not-so-subtle messages about what constitutes success, security, and appropriate behavior. The cultural narrative that equates worth with achievement, security with happiness, and conformity with belonging creates an environment where taking risks feels not just uncomfortable but potentially catastrophic to our social standing. Media plays a significant role in amplifying fears by disproportionately focusing on negative outcomes and worst-case scenarios. For every story about someone who took a risk and succeeded, there are dozens about those who failed, were rejected, or faced criticism. This creates a cognitive bias where we overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes and underestimate our ability to handle challenges or setbacks. The hidden costs, what we lose when we choose safety over growth. Living a fear-driven life exacts a toll that often goes unnoticed until the accumulated weight of unexpressed potential becomes unbearable. These costs compound over time, creating a life that may appear successful from the outside but feels hollow and unfulfilling from within. The death of dreams. Perhaps the most tragic cost of fear-based living is the systematic abandonment of our deepest dreams and aspirations. Dreams require uncertainty, risk, and the possibility of failure. All things that fear teaches us to avoid. Over time, we learn to modify our dreams to fit within the boundaries of what feels safe, gradually reducing them from inspiring visions to modest hopes to eventual resignation. This dream erosion happens through a process of rationalization that makes it feel reasonable and mature. We tell ourselves we're being realistic when we abandon the dream of writing a novel in favor of a stable corporate job. We convince ourselves we're being responsible when we choose the predictable relationship over the passionate but uncertain one. We frame our retreat from boldness as wisdom when it's actually fear dressed up in socially acceptable language. The tragedy is not just in the dreams we abandon, but in the person we fail to become by not pursuing them. Our dreams are not just external goals, but internal calling cards from our deepest self, showing us who we have the potential to become. When we ignore these calls, we don't just miss out on achievements. We miss out on the growth, resilience, and self-discovery that comes from pursuing what matters most to us. Relationship limitations. Fear profoundly impacts our ability to form deep, authentic relationships. When we're terrified of rejection, abandonment, or vulnerability, we develop protective strategies that paradoxically create the very isolation we're trying to avoid. We may choose partners based on safety rather than compatibility, avoiding the uncertainty and growth that come with truly intimate relationships. Fear teaches us to present edited versions of ourselves, showing only the parts we believe are acceptable while hiding our struggles, insecurities, and authentic desires. This creates relationships built on performance rather than genuine connection, leaving us feeling lonely even when surrounded by people who know only our carefully curated persona. The fear of conflict leads many to avoid difficult conversations, sacrificing depth and resolution for the illusion of harmony. Relationships stagnate in superficial pleasantness while underlying issues remain unaddressed, preventing the intimacy and growth that come from working through challenges together. Career and creative stagnation. In professional life, fear manifests as playing it safe with career choices, avoiding roles that require stretch and growth in favor of positions where we're confident we won't fail. This leads to professional stagnation, where we become experts at jobs that no longer challenge or inspire us, trading growth for security and passion for predictability. Fear-based career decisions often prioritize external validation and social approval over internal fulfillment and authentic contribution. We choose professions based on what our families expect, what society values, or what provides the most security rather than what aligns with our natural talents and deepest interests. Creative expression becomes another casualty of fear-based living. The risk of criticism, rejection, or being perceived as self-indulgent leads many to abandon creative pursuits entirely, or engage with them only as private hobbies never shared with the world. This robs both the individual of the fulfillment that comes from creative expression and the world of their unique contribution. Physical and mental health consequences. Living in a constant state of fear-based restriction creates chronic stress that manifests in both physical and mental health challenges. The body, designed to handle acute stress followed by recovery, begins to break down under the persistent tension of a life lived in perpetual defensive mode. Anxiety becomes a constant companion when we're always anticipating potential threats and worst-case scenarios. Depression often follows as the gap between our authentic desires and our fear-constrained reality becomes increasingly painful to bear. The energy required to constantly monitor and avoid potential risks leaves us depleted and disconnected from the vitality that comes from living aligned with our deepest values and aspirations. The illusion of safety. Why fear-based choices don't actually protect us. One of the most compelling aspects of fear-based living is the promise of safety and security. Fear presents itself as a wise counselor, helping us avoid pain, rejection, and failure. However, this promise of protection is largely illusory, and the safety we think we're gaining by avoiding risks often comes at the cost of the very security and fulfillment we're seeking to protect. The security myth. The jobs we choose for security can be eliminated through downsizing, automation, or economic shifts, regardless of how carefully we've played it safe. The relationships we enter for stability can end, despite our attempts to avoid conflict and vulnerability. The financial security we prioritize can disappear through market crashes, health crises, or other unforeseen circumstances beyond our control. What fear-based thinking fails to recognize is that the only real security comes from developing our capacity to handle uncertainty, to adapt to changing circumstances, and to recover from setbacks. By avoiding challenges and risks, we actually decrease our resilience and adaptability, making us more vulnerable to the inevitable changes and challenges that life presents. The opportunity cost of caution. Every fear-based choice comes with an opportunity cost. The path not taken, the experience not had, the growth not achieved. While we can't know with certainty what would have happened if we'd chosen differently, we can observe the general pattern that those who take thoughtful risks and pursue meaningful challenges tend to develop greater resilience, confidence, and life satisfaction than those who prioritize safety above all else. The person who stays in an unfulfilling job for security may avoid the short-term uncertainty of career change, but also misses the opportunity to discover work that energizes and inspires them. The individual who avoids intimate relationships to prevent heartbreak may escape emotional pain, but also forfeits the joy, growth, and connection that comes from loving and being loved deeply. The paradox of control. Fear often drives an illusion of control, convincing us that by carefully managing our choices and avoiding risks, we can control outcomes and prevent suffering. This creates a paradox where the more we try to control our lives through fear-based choices, the more out of control we actually become. Life becomes a constant exercise in anxiety management rather than authentic living. We spend enormous energy trying to predict and prevent potential problems instead of developing the confidence and skills to handle whatever arises. This leaves us feeling powerless and reactive, always trying to stay one step ahead of imagined threats rather than actively creating the life we truly want. Breaking free. The psychology of courage. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in alignment with our values and aspirations despite fear's presence. Understanding courage as a skill that can be developed rather than a trait that some people possess and others lack is crucial for anyone seeking to expand beyond a fear-constrained life. Redefining courage. True courage is not about being fearless or reckless. It's about developing the ability to feel fear fully while not allowing it to make our decisions for us. Courageous people experience fear just as intensely as anyone else. They've simply developed the capacity to acknowledge fear's presence while choosing their actions based on their values, rather than their anxieties. This reframe is liberating because it means we don't have to wait until we're unafraid to take meaningful action. We don't have to overcome fear to live courageously. We simply have to be willing to take fear along for the ride while we pursue what matters most to us. Building courage incrementally. Like physical strength, courage develops through progressive training. We can't expect to go from a fear-based life to bold risk-taking overnight, but we can gradually expand our comfort zone through small, consistent actions that challenge our fear-based assumptions. This might begin with something as simple as speaking up in a meeting when we usually remain silent, trying a new restaurant instead of going to the familiar place, or sharing a creative project with a trusted friend. Each small act of courage builds evidence that we can handle uncertainty, and that our fears are often more intense than the actual experience of moving through them. The role of values in courageous living. Courage becomes sustainable when it's anchored in clear values rather than driven by impulse or ego. When we know what matters most to us, whether that's creativity, connection, contribution, growth, or something else entirely, we have a North Star that can guide us through fear's objections and society's expectations. Values-based courage doesn't require us to become different people. It asks us to become more fully who we already are underneath the layers of conditioning and fear. It's not about adopting someone else's definition of bold living, but about discovering and expressing our own authentic desires and aspirations. Practical strategies for expanding beyond fear, moving from a fear-based life to one of authentic expression and calculated risk-taking requires both inner work and practical strategies. The following approaches have been tested by countless individuals who have successfully expanded their lives beyond the limitations fear initially imposed. Fear inventory and categorization. Begin by conducting an honest inventory of the fears that currently influence your decisions. Write down the specific fears that come up when you consider pursuing goals, relationships, or experiences that appeal to you. Notice patterns. Are you primarily afraid of judgment, failure, financial insecurity, or something else? Categorize these fears into two groups: realistic concerns that require practical preparation and anxiety-based fears that are disproportionate to actual risk. The fear of starting a business without adequate financial planning is different from the fear of starting a business because people might think you're presumptuous. The first requires practical problem solving. The second requires inner work. The worst-case scenario exercise. For each significant fear, take it to its logical conclusion by imagining the absolute worst-case scenario. What would actually happen if your worst fear came true? How would you handle it? What resources, skills, and support systems would you have available? Most people discover that even their worst-case scenarios are survivable and often lead to growth opportunities they hadn't considered. The fear of public speaking becomes less paralyzing when you realize that forgetting your words during a presentation would be embarrassing but not permanently damaging, and that most people are understanding of human imperfection. Progressive risk-taking. Develop courage by taking progressively larger risks in areas that matter to you. If your goal is to start a business, begin by testing your idea with a small pilot project rather than quitting your job immediately. If you want to improve your relationships, start by being slightly more vulnerable in conversations with trusted friends before tackling deeper issues with family members. This graduated approach allows you to build evidence of your competence and resilience while developing the skills needed to handle larger challenges. Each successful navigation of a small risk provides fuel for taking slightly bigger ones. Mindfulness and fear response. Develop awareness of how fear manifests in your body and thoughts. Notice the physical sensations: tight chest, shallow breathing, tense shoulders, and the mental patterns. Catastrophic thinking, worst-case scenario planning, rationalization. This awareness creates space between the fear response and your actions, allowing you to choose your response rather than react automatically. Practice breathing techniques, meditation, or other mindfulness practices that help regulate your nervous system when fear arises. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to remain centered and capable of clear thinking even when anxiety is present. Building a support network. Surround yourself with people who support your growth rather than reinforce your limitations. This might mean finding new communities, joining groups related to your interests, or working with coaches or therapists who understand the journey of expanding beyond fear-based living. Avoid sharing your emerging goals and dreams with people who consistently respond with warnings, doubts, or discouragement. While their concerns may come from a place of caring, constant exposure to other people's fears can reinforce your own and make courageous action more difficult. Reframing failure and setbacks. Develop a growth mindset around failure by viewing setbacks as information rather than verdicts on your worth or capabilities. Every attempt teaches you something valuable, whether it succeeds according to your original plan or not. The failed job interview provides practice and feedback for the next opportunity. The relationship that doesn't work out teaches you more about what you truly need in a partner. This reframe transforms failure from something to be avoided at all costs into a natural part of the learning process, reducing the stakes around taking risks and making it easier to take action despite uncertainty about outcomes. The compound effect of courageous living. One of the most compelling aspects of choosing growth over safety is the compound effect that develops over time. Each act of courage, no matter how small, creates positive momentum that makes subsequent brave choices easier and more natural. Confidence through evidence. As you successfully navigate challenges and uncertainties, you build a personal database of evidence proving your capability and resilience. This evidence-based confidence is more stable and reliable than confidence based on others' opinions or external achievements, because it comes from lived experience of your own competence. The person who has handled job loss, relationship challenges, financial setbacks, or other difficulties knows at a cellular level that they can handle whatever comes next. This doesn't eliminate fear, but significantly reduces its power to paralyze or dictate decisions. Expanded identity and self-concept. Living courageously gradually expands your identity from person who plays it safe to person who rises to meet challenges. This identity shift creates a positive feedback loop where you naturally begin to see opportunities where you once saw only threats, possibilities where you once saw only problems. Your self-concept evolves from someone who needs protection from uncertainty to someone who can handle whatever uncertainty brings. This fundamental shift in how you see yourself ripples out into every area of life, affecting career choices, relationship decisions, creative expression, and daily interactions. Inspiration and impact on others. Perhaps unexpectedly, living more courageously has a profound impact on the people around you. Others are inspired by watching someone break free from fear-based limitations and often find permission to examine their own constrained choices. Parents who live boldly give their children implicit permission to do the same. Friends who pursue their dreams create possibility templates for their social circles. This ripple effect means that choosing growth over safety is not just a personal decision, but a contribution to the collective courage of your community. Every time someone chooses authenticity over approval, meaningful risk over empty security, or growth over stagnation, they make it slightly easier for others to do the same. Navigating the transition from fear to freedom. The journey from fear-based living to authentic expression is rarely linear or smooth. Understanding the typical challenges and phases of this transition can help normalize the process and provide encouragement when the path becomes difficult. The discomfort of growth. Expanding beyond fear-based limitations is inherently uncomfortable because it requires leaving familiar patterns and ways of being, even when those patterns aren't serving us well. The discomfort of growth can feel more intense than the discomfort of limitation because it's active and unfamiliar rather than passive and known. Expect periods of anxiety, self-doubt, and longing for the simplicity of your former constrained life. These feelings are normal and temporary parts of the growth process, not evidence that you're making a mistake or that courage isn't worth pursuing. Resistance from others. As you begin living more authentically and taking meaningful risks, you may encounter resistance from people who are accustomed to your former way of being. Family members might express concern about your new choices. Friends might feel threatened by your growth if it highlights their own stagnation. Colleagues might question your new priorities or boundaries. This resistance often comes from love and genuine concern, but it can also stem from others' fears about their own unlived lives. Understanding this dynamic helps you respond with compassion while maintaining your commitment to growth and authenticity, integration, and sustainability. The goal is not to live in a constant state of risk-taking and challenge, but to integrate courage as a natural response to life's opportunities and demands. Sustainable courage includes knowing when to take risks and when to rest, when to push forward and when to consolidate gains, when to listen to fear's warnings and when to move forward despite them. Develop practices that support your continued growth while maintaining your physical and emotional well-being. This might include regular reflection on your values and goals, ongoing learning and skill development, maintaining supportive relationships, and creating space for rest and recovery between periods of intensive growth. Living large, the rewards of a courageous life. The ultimate reward of moving beyond fear-based living is not the elimination of problems or the guarantee of success, but the profound satisfaction of living in alignment with your deepest values and most authentic aspirations. A life expanded beyond fear's limitations offers rewards that no amount of safety can provide. Authentic self-expression. When fear no longer dictates your choices, you're free to discover and express who you truly are rather than who you think you should be. This authentic self-expression is deeply satisfying because it aligns your external life with your internal reality, creating coherence between your values, actions, and identity. Authentic living doesn't mean being selfish or inconsiderate of others, but it does mean making choices based on your genuine desires and values rather than others' expectations or approval. This authenticity is magnetic, drawing people and opportunities that resonate with your true self while naturally repelling those that don't align with your authentic path. Resilience and adaptability. A life spent navigating challenges and uncertainties develops genuine resilience. Not the brittle kind that comes from avoiding difficulties, but the flexible strength that comes from successfully handling whatever arises. This resilience becomes a source of confidence and peace that external circumstances cannot disturb. People who live courageously develop what psychologists call anti-fragility, the ability to not just survive challenges but to grow stronger through them. Each difficult experience becomes a source of wisdom and capability rather than trauma and limitation. Meaningful contribution. When you're no longer using your energy to manage fears and maintain facades, that energy becomes available for contribution and service to others. Courageous living naturally leads to meaningful work, authentic relationships, and positive impact because you're operating from your strengths and passions rather than your limitations and anxieties. The projects you pursue, the relationships you build, and the legacy you create when living courageously tend to be more significant and lasting because they emerge from genuine inspiration rather than fear-based obligation or social pressure. Deep satisfaction and peace. Perhaps most importantly, living beyond fear's constraints creates a deep sense of satisfaction that comes from knowing you're fully inhabiting your life rather than merely surviving it. This satisfaction is independent of external success or others' approval because it comes from the internal recognition that you're living with integrity and courage. This peace is not the peace of a life without problems, but the peace of a person who trusts their ability to handle whatever problems arise. It's the satisfaction of knowing that regardless of outcomes, you're choosing to live fully rather than cautiously, authentically rather than safely, and courageously rather than fearfully. The ripple effects. How one courageous life impacts the world. The decision to live beyond fear's limitations has implications that extend far beyond individual satisfaction and success. Every person who chooses growth over safety, authenticity over approval, and meaningful risk over empty security contributes to a cultural shift toward more courageous living. Modeling possibility. Simply by living courageously, you provide a template for what's possible to everyone who observes your life. Children see that adults can change careers, pursue dreams, and create meaningful lives. Peers witness that it's possible to prioritize fulfillment over security. Community members observe that individual courage can create positive change. This modeling effect is particularly powerful because it demonstrates courage in action rather than simply talking about it. People need to see examples of others successfully navigating the challenges they fear before they can imagine themselves doing the same. Cultural transformation. Cultures change one person at a time as individuals begin making different choices and prioritizing different values. The current cultural emphasis on safety, security, and risk aversion is maintained by millions of individual fear-based choices. As more people choose courage over caution, the cultural narrative begins to shift toward greater acceptance of risk-taking, creativity, and authentic self-expression. This cultural transformation creates an upward spiral where courage becomes more socially acceptable, making it easier for others to make brave choices, which further normalizes courageous living. creating even more permission for others to live authentically. Innovation and progress. Human progress in every field, science, art, technology, social justice, has come from individuals willing to challenge existing limitations and explore unknown territories. Every breakthrough, innovation, and positive change in human history has required someone to move beyond what was safe and familiar into what was uncertain but possible. By choosing to live courageously in your own life, you contribute to the collective human capacity for innovation and positive change. Your willingness to think differently, try new approaches, and challenge existing limitations adds to the pool of human creativity and possibility. Conclusion: reclaiming your birthright to a large life. Fear will always be part of the human experience. It's written into our biology and reinforced by our culture. But fear doesn't have to be the architect of our lives. We have the capacity to acknowledge fear's presence while choosing our actions based on our deepest values, highest aspirations, and most authentic desires. The journey from a fear-constrained life to one of authentic courage is not about becoming fearless, but about becoming someone who can feel fear fully while refusing to let it make decisions for us. It's about developing the wisdom to distinguish between reasonable caution and anxiety-driven avoidance, the strength to pursue what matters despite uncertainty about outcomes, and the integrity to live according to our own values rather than others' expectations. Your life is meant to be large, not in terms of external achievement or social recognition, but in terms of authentic expression, meaningful contribution, and deep satisfaction. The dreams that inspire you, the relationships that call to you, the creative projects that energize you. These are not accidents or fantasies, but invitations to step into the fullness of who you're meant to be. Fear will always whisper that you're not ready, not worthy, not capable. But every person who has ever lived a life of meaning and impact has heard these same whispers and chosen to move forward anyway. You have the same capacity for courage that has allowed humans to create art, build communities, launch innovations, heal relationships, and transform cultures throughout history. The question is not whether you're capable of living courageously. You are. The question is whether you're willing to start where you are, with what you have, imperfectly but authentically. Taking the first small step toward the large life that fear has convinced you is impossible. But your heart knows is your birthright. The world needs what you have to offer when you're no longer hiding behind fear's protective barriers. Your courage, your creativity, your authentic voice, your unique perspective. These are gifts that only you can give, but only if you're willing to step beyond the small life that fear has designed for you and into the expansive existence that your deepest self knows is possible. The choice is always yours. Remain in the familiar prison of fear's construction, or step through the door that has always been unlocked into the vast territory of a life lived fully, courageously, and authentically. Your larger life is waiting. It has always been waiting, and it will continue to wait until you decide that the discomfort of growth is more compelling than the comfort of limitation, and the possibility of failure less frightening than the certainty of regret. If this exploration has resonated with something deep within you, if you've recognized yourself in these patterns or felt a stirring toward the larger life that's possible for you, then you're already beginning the most important journey you'll ever take. Remember, courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about the presence of something more powerful, your commitment to living authentically and fully. Here at the Mind Shelf, we believe that every person carries within them the capacity for an extraordinary life, not defined by external achievement, but by internal alignment, authentic expression, and meaningful contribution. Your journey toward courage is not just personal transformation. It's a gift to everyone whose life you touch. We're honored to be part of your growth journey. If you found value in this deep dive into courageous living, please share it with someone who might need to hear these words today. Subscribe to the Mind Shelf for more insights into the psychology of human potential. And remember, your larger life is not a distant dream, but a present possibility. Available the moment you decide that your authentic desires deserve more consideration than your familiar fears. Keep growing, keep questioning, and keep moving toward the life that calls to your deepest self. We'll see you in the next exploration, where we continue uncovering the wisdom that transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary journeys.